There's a sign over there, it reads Canada's property rights. Last known whereabouts, Communist China. Believe it or not, China brought in property rights.
Property rights, what does that mean, just to...
Well, what does it mean to you when you have ownership?
It's mine, nobody can take it.
That's right. It's mine, nobody can take it.
That's right.
And as long as you don't harm somebody else with what you own, you can do whatever the hell you want.
Okay. You can cut down a tree on your own property?
You can cut down a tree. If you cut down a tree and it falls on your neighbor's car, then you have to pay for the damage. Okay?
Okay.
But you can cut down the tree and then you can sell the tree, you can burn the tree.
And now you can't do that?
No, you have to get permission to do it.
I've been out talking to people, and yes, you certainly do deserve property rights, and I firmly support property rights for you.
I have every sympathy with the farmers. Personally, I'm an engineer, but the thing that really ticks me off is that I'm also just a landowner in West Carleton. And I should be able to enjoy the facilities of having purchased that land and the values and rights that I got by purchasing it with my hard-earned cash. And I spent goodness knows how many hours, days, months trying to fight off city officials who want to take those rights away.
You know, with the Lanark Landowners and every other landowners association, our principle is property rights. We don't want government taking our property. We won't allow them to take our property. We want them to respect our property. And then likewise, we have to respect other people's property.
I had a problem with the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Conservation Authority and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and I decided to call Randy, and 5 months ago I had the honor to sit down at the table with Jacqueline Fennell and Gil Sear and Dwayne McKinley and Doug Aldridge, and the five of us started the Leeds and Grenville Landowners Association. So I want to tell you people today and all the media here today so they all hear what our focus is, and that's to enshrine property rights in the Constitution.
Well, property rights affect everybody and all over Ontario. We've been watching the Lanark group for a while now, and we decided that it's something we need to take issue with in Leeds and Grenville counties as well. The main issues for the Leeds and Grenville counties are going to be fighting a fortification bylaw that they're trying to pass right now in Augusta Township, which will essentially give officer of the court the right to come on your property at any time without you arguing, without telling you to leave. As well, we want to fight putting meters on wells. That's a really strong issue in Leeds and Grenville, and obviously we feel that no one's going to put a meter on our well.
There are a lot of things that we do need to focus on, individual policies, whether it's Regulation 170.03, whether it's the Nutrient Management Act, whether it's the foolish way in which the government is treating sawmills, whether it's the firearms law, and one can go on the Species at Risk Act. But there is one focal point that's very, very, very clear, and that is property rights. And it's not that government shouldn't do what government has to do to protect our environment, to protect our water quality, to make sure that all those other public policy goals are achieved. That's not what the goal is here. It's if you're going to do something, if you're going to impose a cost in order to benefit society at large, just make sure that society at large pays that cost through compensation to the people who are having to change their pattern of behavior.
The attack is also fundamentally about governments that have chosen to trample property rights of farmers and thereby jeopardize the entire rural way of life in our country. Regulations for rural Ontario should reflect rural Ontario.
I understand the difficulties you're facing with all these regulations, and I guess one word comes to mind all the time, and it's bureaucracy. We live in a time of large bureaucracies. Think of the private companies. Think of dealing with the telephone company, the cable company, the banks. Well, governments are the same. The municipal government, the provincial government, the federal government have large bureaucracies that are implementing hordes and hordes of regulations. Nobody ever thinks of the consequences of all these regulations. Now, at the federal level, one of the things that we can do is bring in property rights. And the ideal is to have property rights in the Constitution. But that is a very difficult move because you have to get the federal government and at least 7 provinces to agree. But at the very least, at the federal level, you could get the Parliament to pass a federal law on property rights which in effect would say that henceforth all laws passed that affect persons' property will be subject to compensation, and that's the effect of property rights. If you have property rights, then you get compensated for governments passing laws that interfere with your use of your land. And I believe that it's within our fundamental policies of our party to fight for property rights. And when Parliament opens this fall, I expect, as from our side, a private member's bill to go forward on property rights, and we'll see where it goes in minority government. Anyway, I wish the LLA good luck in what they're doing. And I know that most of their problems are at the provincial level, and they've got all these various departments in the provincial government having all their bureaucrats out chasing the farmers and the landowners. And I hope that they can get at the provincial government to look at it again in a holistic way. Maybe the Department of Rural Affairs should start looking after rural affairs and start dealing with it in the whole manner. Our federal party is with you, and we're going to see what we can do about property rights. Thank you very much.
His name is Bob Fowler, and he got caught a-fouling one day.
Thanks, Randy. You're looking at a criminal, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a killer of geese. We're very often labeled by government, and it's always a label that conceals what we really are, which are landowners. You're going to find that you're called stakeholders. There's an awful lot of other stakeholders. These people are bureaucrats, they're special interest groups, and they're people who are always out in force at any public meeting. Canada doesn't have in its constitution the right to own and enjoy property. A lot of people think that we do have it. We don't, and it's not in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms either. That's pretty strange, isn't it? For a country that's awash in every conceivable right for everything, for everybody, none of its citizens have the constitutional right to own land. The very right that stands at the cornerstone of Western civilization. The one that Russia wrote into its constitution in the 1980s, and even Communist China officially recognized several months ago. Let's talk about those labels. If you're not stakeholders, we're called in all of the government documents stewards. If you look up a definition in the dictionary of a steward, it is a person who administers the property of others. The government tells us that others are really generations yet unborn. You folks are expected then to be an unpaid janitor of your own property while we're waiting for a new crop of stewards. The British North America Act authorizes every province to legislate its own property rights. Opera has several years ago approached the then current government and asked them to put property rights in provincial legislation. They told us that it was too complex. And I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that if you look at the Nutrient Management Act, they don't know what complex is.
You know, we're seeing a lot of regulations coming through. Most of them have this environmental camouflage that they poke over them first before they put them out. That Safe Drinking Water Act, the Nutrient Management Act, Species at Risk Act, and I can go on and on about the number of acts that these guys have. And up our way, we even have the Department of Fisheries and Oceans saying you can't clean out your ditches anymore because there may be a minnow in it. And Department of Fisheries and Oceans, well, they think minnows are more important than you guys out here. Think more, same with people in land art. Those little minnows have to be protected at any cost. Doesn't matter how many farmers we put out of business to protect those minnows.
Another MNR program involves the loggerhead shrike. It's a small bird with an appetite for large insects and small rodents. The MNR says it's endangered. Thus, an MNR program to import shrike breeding pairs into southwestern Ontario. This bird impales its dead prey on such pointed storage sites as thorn trees for later feasting. According to an MNR promotional booklet, each breeding pair requires 10 acres of land. the long-term effect of saving hundreds of thorn trees for supposedly endangered loggerhead shrikes will be of great interest to farmers, particularly those with a healthy crop of thorn trees. By the way, Ontario Bird and MNR Associate Agency advises that anyone approaching a loggerhead shrike nest without a permit is liable to prosecution and, upon conviction, to a fine of up to $50,000 plus 1 year imprisonment. That's democracy, folks.
They want to protect this land. They sell. That's what they tell us. They want to protect this land. We've got a bunch of downtown urban bureaucrats who have created Toronto, created the small capital of Canada, and they want to tell us how to take care of our land. Well, we know what is going to happen. Instead of farms out here and business people, there's going to be Toronto dump sites and urban dump sites and toxic landfills. We have a study in Lanark. The Ministry of Environment paid $1.2 million or $1.4 million to do a 2-year study. And they found there's about 400 sites that are a threat to our water supply up there, or may be a threat in the future. And out of those 400 sites, 385 of them are owned by the government.
The Clean Water Act and the Greenbelt legislation both affect us. We have a bed and breakfast, and we also have property which we use for cross-country skiing and other recreational uses. And that's going to introduce about 325 restrictions on the use of that land, and we believe that's our land and back off government. So we would really like to see property rights enshrined in the Constitution, and that would be a real important thing for all rural residents in Ontario.
We've given Dalton McGilty till March 9th to solve these problems, because on March 9th, if they're not, he plans on implementing that Greenbelt legislation. And we're planning to be at the legislature, and we will be there.
Yeah! And this Greenbelt legislation is going from Algonquin Park to the Adirondacks. So it's covering a wide swath of Ontario, and there's no compensation to the people's properties that it's going to encompass. And that is part of the problem. They're just making these rules, and it's the most Toronto government that I have seen in my lifetime. All these notions and ideas are coming out of bureaucrats in Toronto that don't seem to understand rural Ontario.
In the latest game of regulatory roulette, the Ontario government sterilized almost 2 million acres of land, much of it privately owned. It has, of course, a warm and fuzzy name, the Golden Horseshoe Greenbelt, and all the usual support from lobby groups that will benefit from its early adoption. But it doesn't have scientifically proven justification, it doesn't have an appeal process, and it damn well doesn't have any compensation for disenfranchised landowners.
The boundaries make absolutely no sense. Yet, the government, through Mr. Garretson, has indicated again and again that science was used. The boundaries have political science. The boundaries have land ownership science. All you have to do is look at the Globe and Mail yesterday and look at TVO last night, and it will tell you what Mr. Garretson did in response to a certain person about keeping him out of the Greenbelt. Very interesting, in Halton, there is gerrymandered boundaries, and everybody knows what gerrymandered means. One of the excluded boundaries belongs directly or indirectly to Mattamy Homes. The president of Mattamy Homes was on the Greenbelt Task Group. Hello. Another company, Metro's Development, directly or indirectly, got some Greenbelt gerrymandered out. The general manager of Metros was on the Greenbelt Task Group.
Sponsorship scandal again.
I cannot afford $10,000 to sit and break bread with Mr. Sorbera and Mr. McFlinty. That's why I'm in the Greenbelt. not out of the green belt. I want the government to start over again, consult the people, and ensure that there is a level playing field. The government is deaf and dumb. We know they're dumb, but now we know they're deaf. And we gotta keep telling them what we want. So if we don't get anything by next week, we need to undertake another action.
What we're looking at is a constitutional challenge to get democratic rights back that we've lost and to get property rights that we never had in the first place. I urge your help. We're in the same boat as Randy, we're in the same boat as all of us feel together. Somebody gets it in tobacco, somebody gets it in seed, somebody gets it in cattle, somebody gets it, or all of us get it in property rights that we haven't got. And we are being run by McGinty and his group, by these liberals and their group. They're pissing away money, but they're making us serve. Thank you.
We all live in a rural area and we enjoy the natural environment and we have a very direct interest in preserving it. So why am I opposed to wetlands? Well, basically 3 issues. It's been a very underhand and arbitrary process to designate our properties. The Ministry of Natural Resources has a very bizarre definition of wetlands, and it's been a gross violation of our property rights. If we can talk about the process for a moment, the city started a study in 2003, we think. In September 2004, the environmentalists flew over our property at 2,000 feet and decided which plants were wetland plants and which were not. And in February 2005, our properties were designated wetlands. At this point, we knew nothing about it. It wasn't until April that the city bothered to inform us that we've been designated, and they held an information meeting to tell us all about it. And this was specifically an information meeting. Our input was not required. They were simply telling us what they were doing to us. If we talk about the definition of wetlands, the Ministry has a manual called the Ontario Wetlands Evaluation System Manual, which they use to provide guidance for evaluators. It's designed for bureaucratic simplicity, not for reality. Your property is designated as wetlands based purely on the plants that grow there. Susan Murphy from the city's Environmental Planning Department confirmed that your property doesn't need to be wet to be a wetland. This is bureaucracy gone crazy.
Just because you don't have aquatic plants or plants that you consider to be wetlands doesn't mean it's not wetland. Those trees that are wetland trees would indicate that at some point that land has been flooded.
They don't care if your property is wet. They don't care why it's wet. For instance, city drainage policies. They don't care what was there on your property last year or what will be there next year. It's purely what's growing there right now.
The evaluation process looks at it, what is it today, based on vegetation. It doesn't look at what was it 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, what will it be 10 years from now or 20 years from now, because you can't do that. So you look at it at a point in time and assess it based on the plants that are there.
And to help the evaluators, they have a list of wetland plants in their manual and a list of upland plants. There are 4 pages of wetland plants and only half a page of upland plants. So you can see which way that the evaluation is going to go. So the process goes something like this. The city fails to provide drainage. The water causes spring flooding on our properties. Spring flooding causes wetland plants to grow. The city sees the wetland plants and the city designates our properties. To take another quick example, in the late 80s tree planting was in vogue and everybody was saying we need more trees. So the Ministry of Natural Resources had a managed forest program. And they would come and they would tell you what plants, trees you should be growing on your property, and they would help you to plant them. Guess what? Some of the recommendations were that we plant tamaracks. And guess what? Tamaracks are an indicator species for wetland. So the province recommends tamaracks. The owner takes their recommendation and plants tamaracks. City sees tamaracks. City designates property.
We got Speak up.
So you stripped our landowners of all rights to the property. We have no options anymore. It's basically going to be worthless land, breeding mosquitoes or whatever. And then you stand there and tell us that that's it, too bad. Wash your hands, so long. Is that it?
So the question is, does the city offer compensation? And the answer is no.
I just want to say that nobody is saying that what you're saying about a wetland isn't right. What I think people are objecting to is the fact that you just sort of float in and take away our land or designate our land, which is our land, our property. Nobody's objecting to wetlands, and if it's on our property we want it, pay us for it or buy it from us, but don't just float in here and say we're taking it, because that's stealing.
So
is it not?
So the question is, what right do they have?
That's the question.
It's the provincial policy statement under the Planning Act of Ontario, and they're very clear about protecting what they have defined as provincially significant wetlands.
Basically, it's reducing our property values. The estimates we have from real estate people are that it's from $2,500 an acre to about $200 an acre afterwards. And if you live on a small property, you've probably been reduced a great deal more than that. While the city's doing this, it's talking about building on genuine wetlands, for instance in the current floodplain.
Councillor Sudavika, let's agree with that. He's going to answer that question. I think actually maybe Sean can help out with Timbermere, but I know Timbermere dates back to the early 80s, and I suspect if Timbermere, though, was being dealt with now, that wouldn't be permissible. So that predates me.
How about the move by
yeah, no, sir. Yeah. Do you know what? If I can actually answer it, I'll be delighted to. Okay. The other one with regards to the independent grocer, and more in particular, actually, the Amber Lakes development, which is a housing development that goes down there. There was a band right along Main Street, the first core along Main Street, back in the 70s, when the first official plans that Goulburn did, they designated that commercial. Now again, had that been during the time that, for example, when Stephen and I was on council, that would have been, because that's floodplain. That was designated floodplain, but that right was given in the 70s, and that could not be taken away.
So be wary of the bureaucrats driving in your lane. These environmental words, but they're playing a word game. If they cared about the wetlands, we'd see more of them around, instead of shopping malls and houses on the outskirts of town. So take your little projects and go back to the drawing board, and remember this is our land and not yours to hoard. If you want to see wetlands on your pictures from the sky, you'll treat us with respect and we won't scrape them dry. Silver maple, black ash, and eastern white pine are some of the trees grown on this land of mine. But they're all wetland species, the list is 4 pages long. We'll fight these designations 'cause their methods are wrong.